Okay, let's start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Anatis Knowledge Academy webinar series. Today, we are excited to have Michael Short with us, who will be giving a presentation on key challenges when using biocontrol in greenhouse ornamentals and how to solve them. Mike studied horticulture and integrated pest management at the University of Fraser Valley. He founded Ecohabitat Agri Services over 25 years ago to provide sustainable pest management solutions for greenhouses, nurseries, and organic farms in Ontario. Thank you, Mike, for accepting our invitation to share your knowledge and experience with the Anatis Knowledge Academy community. Now, let's listen to Mike's interesting presentation together. Please feel free to write down your question and I will ask them on your behalf at the end of Mike's presentation.
Thanks, Omid. Thanks for the invitation to come
Thank
on
you.
today, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. I know it was kind of a little bit short notice too, but yeah. So today I wanted to just share with you some of the tips and tricks that we have in ornamental biocontrol. It's there's always some challenges, so. So we'll just touch base on these things. This is going to be fairly general. So if there are, like you said, if there are any questions where you want to go more in depth, just either slip Omid or I a question or something in the chat, and we'll try and delve into it. I'm not going to go into pest ID and things like that. There's other places for that, and that's a different talk. So when Omid invited me to do this, he asked about something in ornamental IPM, and I said, well, it's a big subject. It's like talking about health or something.
Greatly appreciate
So,
it.
so we need to narrow it down a little bit. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too in depth. I'm sometimes called an entomologist. Technically, I'm not. In the big scheme of things, I guess I am, but I'm a true IPM specialist. My training and education has been in the pests, the natural enemies that attack them, and the pesticide and the interaction of all three. And that's the best way I can kind of summarize that in an elevator pitch. So I'm going to get started, and we'll share. Omid's going to tell me if this is going to come through.
It's perfect.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
that's what I'd like to
Yeah,
hear.
thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I've already introduced myself. So the title of the talk is Key Challenges When Using Biocontrol in Greenhouse Ornamentals and How to Solve Them, hopefully. And some of this may be more of a discussion as well, because there is no black and white answer to some of these things, especially in the insect world. So let us know in the chat. Okay, so it's not moving forward. There we go. Just a quick agenda, a bit of an introduction to IPM. We always have to start our talks like that because we're not sure of the audience. I came up with 10 challenges in using biocontrol in ornamentals. They may not be everybody's challenge, but it's just 10 that I've kind of chosen based on some of the questions I get from some of our clients and that sort of thing. There are a lot more challenges than 10, but we'll work on those. Then I'll go into one of the big questions is whether once you've released your biocontrol, we're going to call them BCAs here, biocontrol agents. Once you've released them, are they actually working, and how do we assess that? This isn't necessarily when you first receive them. There are some quality control, good websites out there for that. This is more, are they working once you release them? We're going to assume that they came in good health. How to keep them around is a big thing. So a lot of questions whether we can apply different sprays and that sort of thing and still keep them around. That's one of EcoHabitat's strengths, is we're able to keep things going and assess that so that you can integrate some soft sprays into your programs. IPM disruptors, these are going to be some of the things that we don't have any biocontrol for. There are insects, there may be insects that eat them. We just don't have anything that's good enough or commercially available. And then some success stories, and based on some of the crops we've worked on over the years, um, and had some biocontrol success on. Again, it's in flowers. A little bit of the history of IPM in Ontario, where I've been fortunate enough to be kind of in ground zero, if you want to use that term. I think I use it too much, of IPM and ornamentals here in Ontario. We've had really good, um, first of all, very good growers, early adopters of things. We were able to try things without any question in some of our greenhouses, most of our greenhouses that we choose to do research in, applied research, and a great team of people from cross sectors and throughout the industry that have worked together on this, heading towards the same path of getting, our main mandate has been to cut down on pesticide use so that we can uh, use alternative methods like biocontrol. So in Canada, we're in a special situation here. We don't get a lot of new products on the market as far as chemicals go. And when we do, it takes a long time, and usually it's not that effective by the time we get it. So we've had to look for different. We've been forced to look for different ways of controlling pests and managing them, and of course, biocontrol is the top of that list. Um, I've been in this over 25 years, and when I first came in, it was basically a broad spectrum toxic chemicals, and in a lot of cases, they were sprayed twice a week. Uh, and uh, and there was certain folks like Graham Murphy from Omafra who was trying to insert biocontrol into these toxic chemical spray regimes, and I'll get into that in a little bit later. About 15 years ago, and I may be off on the years a little bit, but Flowers Canada had this great idea to provide supply grants to growers. Boy, where are those grants now? But they were growers that weren't using biocontrol at the time, and they were given a grant, and I can't remember how much it was, to buy biocontrols just to get them introduced to that. And there are all kinds of different levels of growers that were using one or two biocontrols, but it really tipped the scale as far as getting people uh, more involved in it. And of course, the biocontrol companies jumped right all over it. So this is a little dated now, but 2013 there was an MNP survey done with greenhouse Ontario floriculture greenhouses, and found that 90% were using some sort of biocontrol. I'm going to jump right out there and say it's about 100% now. That's including biopesticides now, which we didn't have too many at the time. So components of IPM, prevention is a big one. Of course, prevention is just like your health. If you can prevent getting sick, it's worth a lot. If you can do that as far as screening or bringing in clean plants, which we'll get into, um, all the better. It gives you a better footing for doing an IPM program. Sanitation, of course, when you do see something like algae, um, uh, any kind of the disease, sanitation, that sort of thing. We have all kinds of products out there that you can work on your keeping things clean. Monitoring and identification, that's the foundation of what we do at Eagle Habitat. So we have provided weekly scouting service. So that's of course I'm biased, but that is the foundation of every IPM program. the action you would take from that monitoring, where you give a recommendation, it could be biocontrol or sprays or a mix of the two. And assessing what that's doing is important as well. And of course, that goes into monitoring after the action as well. So, and we're today really going to focus on biocontrol. That is the kind of the jazzy component of IPM. Um, it's got the most the biggest learning curve, and we have the most information about biocontrol. So originally, biocontrol breeding was for releasing into greenhouse vegetables. At the time, that was the biggest market. Well, it still is. And um, everything was fairly consistent. So if you grew uh, cucumbers in, I should say, tomatoes in Canada, is it similar to growing tomatoes in Europe? Yes, it is. So you can that consistency in the um, the environment for BCAs is can be important. When I got my start in the 90s, we took the information from vegetables and began to make the leap into ornamentals, which is more challenging. And and that's what we're going to focus on today. So some of the things there are, of course, a lot more biocontrol options now than there was, decades ago. So you really have a lot more to experiment with, and we have done that. Um, so it can complicate the equation though when you're adding biocontrol. So if you're in the days when you used to spray every Tuesday, thank goodness that's over. But if in those days, it was Tuesday, so you sprayed. So now biocontrol, I think of it as like having kids. So those free and easy days before you had kids, and then you have kids, it complicates things. You want to look after them and that sort of thing when you just had to look after yourself. So I don't know whether that's a good analogy or not, but it can complicate things. So we're going to try and help you through that. So challenge number one, and I said before I have picked out 10. So economic damage levels. So in vegetables, the insect can go to work on a plant. Think of a big cucumber plant in a greenhouse that is floor to ceiling, just about, and one end to the other, many, many acres. Um, you can have, and you do have lots of insect pests in there. I've never been in a greenhouse yet that's been absolutely clean. I'd have questions about it if it was. So when you're putting biocontrol into there, you don't need 100% control. You're not going to get it anyway. So you have peaks and valleys and things like that. But the advantage is, as long as you don't go too high and damage threshold, you can still harvest the vegetables or the fruit. So in ornamentals, that's blown out of the water. So I had one grower years ago that was shipping to the United States. We're based in Canada. So he didn't want any blemishes whatsoever on his flower head. So knowing that one thrips, and by the way, it is one thrips, two thrips, uh, they can cause enough damage so that you can't sell that flour. Some of them get by with things like mixing it with other, putting it in flour mixes, cut flour mixes, especially other potted plant mixes to kind of hide it. There has been some dyeing of flowers with a different color and that sort of thing to hide some things. So there are kind of ways around it a little bit, but So what's important, and I've kind of written, a somewhat answer at the bottom in black here. So, you work with that grower about finding their damage comfort zone. I mentioned that one grower years ago. I kind of backed them off a little bit, and it became you know, we could tolerate a bit, right? So, and that's, it comes down to communication. People have heard me say it's what I do is 5% entomology and 95% psychology. So communication is important on all levels. Challenge number two, plant material movement. If you think about vegetables, are they moving? They might be moving along a wire or something, but you don't generally you don't have things coming in from outside, plant material coming in from outside in a great big vegetable greenhouse. So you do in ornamentals, especially the potted planted guys. So uh, you inherit, you can inherit problems from upstream. So no matter where you're getting it from, there could be coming in with pests or pesticide residue. And we see that quite often. So why is that important? One is if it's coming in with the pest, you're shooting yourself in the foot. It's biocontrol takes longer to work. Uh, and as opposed to a spray. And of course, pesticide residue um, will cause your biocontrol discomfort at the very least and death at the most. So, depending on what the pesticide is. And you have no history of what that pesticide is. I've tried. They won't give it to you. So once the plant material is in, of course, you have a lot of places now where they have movable benches and that sort of thing that are moving all the time. I have one client that is totally automated, so you got to get out of the way of the benches uh, or you get run over. So potted plants that move within the growing space. There's constant movement. So for the incoming cuttings, there's some good. I won't go into detail on this, but there's some good videos and website out there. One is Vineland Research and Innovation Center. If you get a chance to look at their videos, plant dips, any of the labels. Like Botanic Garden, that sort of thing that have plant dips on there. That was all done here in Ontario to get that on. All that work was done in Rose House and et al. And really good work. So there are plant dips for cuttings. Even growers are dipping rooted cuttings, which is a little harder to do, but it is possible. So when things are moving around your greenhouse, identify those pest hot spots and convey to the pest control manager before the plants are moved. Of course, it all depends on the plant stage as well. If there's ready to go out, you definitely want to let somebody know that there's pests going on that, moving on that. Many different varieties. Just look at the picture on your right there. It's there's all kinds of different just all that on the bench there is I think everything hanging too is geraniums. Look at all the different cultivars geraniums. Um, so you can have different pest pressures for different things, even different cultivars. We continually see that. Crops you can move out, you can ship out a zone and then put another crop in that. You have to know what pests and disease are on that last one in case there's any holdover. And then, of course, that's where sanitation comes in too. But when you're really busy, and you need to move product fast, sometimes that gets put on the side. Um, so so one thing you can do is have on your plan certain zones where you know you're putting in something from a pest point of view, pest and disease point of view. It's not a host. And we really have started to do that with our clients. It's not easy because they have done the same thing for decades. Um, so a grower doesn't necessarily always look at the how things look at the pest end of things. So that's our job to communicate that to them. We do use indicator plants. I was trying to come up with some good examples on that. Um, but there are, I actually call them early indicator plants because things like thrips will go to certain plants and even cultivars earlier than the rest of the crop. So knowing that, you can look at those plants and see what kind of levels you're about to have. And if it takes a spot spray or a spot release, it's a good example. I'll just give you one example of that, and it is online somewhere. It's um, a research trial that we did in conjunction with Rose Butenhaus uh, we noticed that a certain variety of potted mum was being more affected by thrips, not only thrips feeding, but thrips reproduction on it too. So we actually ran with that. And it turned out it was a yellow flowering plant. So we ended up putting yellow flowering mum plants in a chrysanthemum crop and then bagging them as the numbers got high and saving the rest of the crop. And it worked really well. It's not for everybody, but it proved that we can do it. It ended up that we didn't even need them in the flowering stage. They were still attractive. Challenge 4, busy shipping times. This goes without saying. Our our pest insects show up at exactly the same time as these big shipping holiday dates, Mother's Day, Valentine's, that sort of thing. So uh, that's one pressure, and the other pressure is pulling an IPM specialist off their duties to help on the shipping end of things. The only thing I can say about that is make yourself important. If you're an IPM specialist, let your operation know that it is important that you don't miss a week, especially in those high pressure times. You might be able to get away with it, say in December or something, but it is important to go on a weekly basis through your crop. So, uh, and you're usually the one that gets in trouble when they're about to ship something that's got aphids or something on it. So. Proper identification. Again, we push this all the time. On your right, it's not a very good picture on my fault of different species of thrips blown up. So they can have different control strategies, and they're different just not only in the different species, but also in the different life stages. So um, for example, if we're sticking with thrips, the early larval stage, you're attacked by the predatory mite that you may have in your crop. Um, but once you get into the older larval stages, so when you are monitoring and you see that change, it's harder to get control. So we have things for the adults. We kind of miss those last instars of thrips development in the young. So it is important while you're scouting to see that you're in a different stage, and it goes in cycles. So you'll see more adults, and then you'll see more larvae, that sort of thing. So, and of course, the different species are different as well. So, challenge number 7: when to release bios. So, bios don't always work at all times of the year. Um, on your right, you'll see Eremoceras eremicus, who's a parasitoid of whiteflies. That's a good example. And still seeing releases of whitefly parasitoids, and Carcias being another, released between the end of November to March 15th. And although they'll hatch off out of the cards or whatever, or the the pupa that they come on, but their reproduction is limited, if anything. So you might get some host feeding with these wasps at that time of year, but it's not your best use for whitefly control at that time of the year. So I always say March for the Ides of March, or that's the key time that we can go crazy with parasitoids. Some need their to be enhanced. So we have done a lot of work, especially in the last 5 years or so, 5 to 10, adding supplemental food sources, all commercially available to extend the reproduction into the year. If you were at the Canadian Greenhouse Conference last week, you would have sat in on Veronica's talk about using supplemental food to extend aureus right through the winter as far as reproduction goes. And that is a big thing. It's called diapause, where the day lengths put them to sleep. So put them to sleep as far as reproducing. And watch your greenhouse temperatures. We got in Ontario this summer, we had several days of 48 degrees Celsius. I'm not going to do the American version. 48, it's damn hot. So that was outside. And so inside, hot and humid. 100% humidity, relative humidity. So not all bios work that well in those. You have to kind of prepare for that. Expect it to be in the midsummer times. And so if you're counting um, on BCAs to work well through that, you may be disappointed. Luckily, we do have biopesticides, which are part of the program, that work better in the hot and humid. So that was 8 outside flight pressure. We had an interesting year this year in Ontario. Our season was about 2 weeks early as far as spring goes. So we had where we could count on past data of things flying in like thrips. It was about 2 weeks early on things. So, and it seemed to be fairly consistent right through. So, and the plants for that matter too were early. So, they'll build up in the surrounding area. Sometimes it takes high temperature or weeds dying down, that sort of thing, and they'll take flight. Thrips don't actually fly; they just kind of levitate, and the wind takes them into your greenhouse. So uh, the other thing on your right is two-spotted spider mite. One thing I noticed years ago was people weren't getting to their duties of knocking down weeds around the outside perimeter of the greenhouses. It's not as big a problem now because we have buffer zones and that sort of thing, and gravel. Um, but when you knock down those weeds and grass late in the season, like in the hot summer, there may be something on them. And a lot of times it's spider mites because they love that kind of weather. And when you knock them down, especially with something like a herbicide that takes its time, they'll crawl right through your wall of your greenhouse and end up on the inside of perimeter of your crop. So we saw some patterns fairly early on about that, and I do push for people to, no matter what you're doing, how busy you are, get out there and keep things clean as you can, and you won't get that. When you're monitoring, of course, you're taking data, so find out when those flights are. We know in Ontario that onion thrips are in flight mid-June. Again, this year was a bit earlier. And again, towards the end of August into September. So we can prepare for that because it is a different control strategy than Western flower thrips. Screen vents, obviously, it's not possible for everybody. Just watch out that it does hinder airflow. So creating more air surface, like in a tent, has worked in the past. And I mentioned the perimeter beats. 2009 pesticide resistance. Um, you can't you can't always tell what's happening upstream, and you have absolutely no control of it. I've tried to find out what uh, suppliers of plant products have sprayed on their material, and it's run around. They won't tell you. So you may have a pest coming in on your plant material that's already resistant to pesticides, and probably have the pesticide residue on that material as well. So know your source of plant material. Work with the same. If you find a clean one, clean source, work with them. Uh, you know, season after season. So, um, the obvious one is to rotate chemicals, and a lot of people I know still don't know that when something's resistant to a chemical, it's resistant to the whole family of that chemical. Luckily, we have uh, uh, some new products that are generally their own family. So that's there's a reason for that. They're getting away from that. And then we're extending, and this is where our program does quite well. We're extending time in between chemical sprays by the use of bios and biopesticides. As far as we know, there's no significant pesticide resistance to biopesticides. Hopefully, it stays that way. Challenge 10, and the last challenge, IPM disruptors. On your right is Lygus, which is tarnished plant bug. That's where I actually got my start in research in BC in that. It can fly 2 kilometers in one flight. So no matter what you do, except for screening, you may see it in your plants. Now, it only has certain hosts in the greenhouse, mums being one, snapdragons is a good one. And its damage, it injects a toxin into the tip of the plant and it eliminates apical dominance, and you end up with, 2 stems, that sort of thing. So, and on the right is the adult, and on the left is the nymph, which does not fly. The adult does minimal damage. The nymph will do a circle of damage because it's walking from plant to plant. We have no bios for those. I have watched Aureus eat the young nymph, the early instars. But it's one thing to eat something; it's another thing to control it. So, and they always seem to come in at the same time at the end of the summer when the weeds die down. Onion thrips. The very longest time I was talking to the wind when I said, our biocontrol programs are allowing onion thrips to go wild. And of course, when you put onion thrips into a petri dish with something like a cucumerous predatory mite, they eat them. Like the predatory mite eats them fine. But when we're doing it on a large scale in a crop, it does not control it. So, of course, the newer one is Parvis spinus, which there's still some more work to do, but it looks like bios are having a hard time with it. So Lewis might have a question mark behind that. We're working quite a bit with Lewis mite in poinsettias, and we've found Phalacis predatory mite does quite well, but if it's not found in time, you have to spray. And so I think there's potential there to control it totally biological, but we're still working on it. Mealybug I have here, of course, everyone knows the fun to watch um, predator that looks like a mealybug. And the name is escaping me right now, but anyway, it's if you're moving plant material quickly, especially in tropicals, it just takes too long. So unfortunately, you need a fairly toxic drench to take care of mealybug, at least the ones we have in Ontario. So that's the end of the challenges, but these are all challenges as well. So how do you know your bios are working? Now, this isn't, like I said before, isn't when you're first receiving them. We're gonna stick with parasitoids of aphids because we have had all kinds of problem with it lately in the last few years. So um, when you first receive it, you should find them in, or at least mostly in the mummy stage in the vial. If they're already hatched, which everyone likes watching, they've hatched somewhere along the line from coming from some other place on the airplane, and they're not as fresh. So get them in the mummy stage. Point it out to your biocontrol supplier that they're coming already hatched. Um, so when you find aphid colonies, it does depend. I probably should put plant stage as important. It's probably number one. So if it's found in, we determine our plant stage as 1 to 4. So 1 would be, newly rooted. 2 would be pre-bud. 3 would be bud. 4 would be in full bloom, ready to go at the door. So if you're finding it in 1 or 2, even the late stage of 2 might be pushing it. The way our parasitoids are working now, they're not working as fast as they used to. Um, then you may have to do a spray as far as waiting for the biocontrols to work on it, especially definitely in the stage 4. So you're also watching for the actual adults coming through the crop. Not always easy to see unless you're trained at it. It's kind of the void, the space in between plants that you're looking, and they hover kind of on an angle when they're flying. Um, People will mistake them for fungus gnats. Fungus gnats, if you can see my hand now, it's fluttering all around. It's not a straight line flyer. Aphidius, at least, are kind of straight line, and they have their head up and they're bummed down. So um, parasitism should happen fast. So what we look for is when you first find that aphid, and let's say it's in stage 1 of the plants, we're looking for more and more parasitism each week. Let's say we have 3 weeks to work with, which is a long time. It used to happen a lot quicker than that. We need to see more parasitism happening each week. And by that 3rd week, we should have at least 80% of the colony controlled. Now, the reason for that happening fast is because once the Ophidius lays an egg, as in the picture it's doing here, it's one of the best pictures in biocontrol, lays its egg in there, the aphid stops giving birth um, and feeding. It may walk around for a bit more, but a mummy then forms over it, and a new wasp hatches out of that in 7 to 10 days. So aphids, probably don't have to explain this to you, but they don't need to really mate, give or take. So they're babies. They have babies inside of them that have babies inside of them. So 7 generations, not 7 babies, 7 generations in 48 hours, if the conditions are right, is possible. So you need those wasps to happen fast, the parasitism to happen fast. So what we're looking for when we're scouting is finding 1 mummy on a plant. When I just explained how fast those aphids reproduce, if you find 1 mummy, it got there really fast, the wasp did. So that's what we're looking for. Predators. So, we take plant taps all the time. And, this photo on the right is a couple of fallacious, I'm going to say, feeding on spider mite. And that's ganging up on something. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for ganging up. If we go too many tap plants without finding any predatory mites, we either don't have enough or there's something that's gone wrong, whether it's been a spray or something like that. So I will question the pest manager, if something had got put on by accident or something. So, um, predatory mites, one way of finding out whether they're feeding is they move quite fast. Pests move slow, predators move fast. And if they're stopped, they're usually feeding on something, and they will feed on pollen and things like that too. So, how to keep your bios around. This is one of the big challenges many growers face. Of course, they must be in good shape when they arrive. I went through that. So know your pesticide residue levels for bios, and there's some good charts on, I'm going to say charts, but there's some good apps on there now on your phone that you can get. BioBest has a good one where it'll tell you the pesticide, where you punch in the pesticide and punch in the bio that you want. And in many cases, they'll give you how many days you can have a bio after a pesticide. But this also goes for early product that's coming into your greenhouse that'll have pesticide residue in from from another source. I didn't include it here. I always like to do it, but it's a project years ago that Cooper did on poinsettia cuttings, and the list of pesticides. They were just looking at pesticide residue at the at when it came into the greenhouse, and they took many samples, different cultivars, and the amount of pesticides on there is just about anything you could think of, and that was probably about 15 years ago. So hopefully it's gotten better, but most of those will affect your BCAs. There's also integral predation, and that is basically one biocontrol eating another one. So be aware of that. Quite a well-known one is Swirsky predatory mite will eat cucumbers. Predatory mite. We kind of use that on our programs as we know that, so we use it kind of as an advantage. So when if a grower is willing to do Swirsky in the summer months, and we've had cucumbers all winter, we'll overlap them a bit, so it gives them a little bit of a food source. And then as long as you're not still releasing cucumbers and wasting your money. So we have done that in the past. Not everybody's up for that, but we have done it. And then there's on that same kind of vein is adding supplemental food to avoid diapause. And of course, the famous one is Aureus on your right there. Another great picture of it sucking the juices out of whiteflies, babies, and I think, and and again, Veronica was talking about that, adding supplemental food around 11 hours, 11 and a half hours of day length. So day length triggers it into going to diapause. So that means it's not going to give birth. So you would have to continue to release Aureus without it reproducing if you didn't do something in our climate anyway. We're in the northern hemisphere, so it's a little bit different other places. So so that was an interesting talk. So she had it worked out so that was when to exactly do that and that sort of thing. I thought it was very interesting. So that was at Canadian Greenhouse Conference. Again, how to keep them around at bankers. This is one of our programs we have going on the floor is poinsettias. In the air, there's an eggplant. I put arrows there. It's very important to keep your any kind of banker system well cared for, because as soon as it starts stressing out, then it doesn't work as well as far as getting biocontrol to reproduce and that sort of thing. So the two arrows are just showing an independent, an independent water line that they put up just for the banker plants in the hanging baskets. So you can remove them. We had done programs in the past where we weren't really sure how it was going to go, so we left banker plants on a cart with wheels and moved them out. and moved them back in when the spraying was done, residue was done. So, and then there's others that you have to have that banker plant in. Quite a good one is, and I meant to put a picture up here, but mullein plant, which is a weed in a pot for Dicyphus, which is a generalist that people are using for whitefly and thrips control. Anything else it'll eat. Um, this is another disruptor, and I included this because because we had that earlier spring this year, we've had more of this happening. And so it's hyperparasites. In Ontario here, we have three different species. Rose Butenhaus ID'd them. I think actually she did her PhD on them. So um, it's so on the top picture, you see a normal parasitized aphid by Aphidius. It's got that trap door, we call it. So it leaves that, it kind of goes, what it's doing is eating its way out of that mummy as an adult, and it does about 9/10 of the way around. And it's more of a roundish uh, um, shape. And on the bottom is hyperparasites. And the way we can tell is it doesn't have that trap door. Now, there's some, it, look longer than just one because sometimes the trap door falls off and things like that. Um, so why that's a problem is there's a hyperparasite wasp will come and parasitize the mummy. So the mummy has already been parasitized by the good guy. And then a bad guy comes along and parasitizes it again and feeds on uh, the baby good guy inside the mummy. I'm really dumbing this down. So, and then a new bad guy hatches out of there, chews his way up, and then goes on and does the same thing. It needs mummies to reproduce. So it has a longer life cycle than Ophidius, as I mentioned there. So what we try and do is if we're doing it on a banker plant, an aphid banker plant, we try and change it up faster because we know that the longer the life cycle of the hyperparasite is, we can use that to our advantage. Now the problem is our Ophidius wasps aren't working that fast anymore, so it used to work really well. Um, In Ontario, we know kind of when it comes in. It's kind of the end of the June. And again, it was earlier this year, but we'll keep our eye on it. So, some of our success stories, I'll just briefly touch on these, but poinsettias is probably the most scouted crop here in Canada than anywhere else in the world. We've done more work with poinsettias because we had to. We had Bemisia whitefly coming in that was resistant to sprays. And you can't spray a lot on poinsettias after middle of September anyway, after brack initiation. Uh, so we had to come up with something, and you know, it's still tentative, but it's the stuff that we have worked on as far as release rates and things like that. Ray Murphy did a lot of that early work. Um, they it still works to this day. So still going. Gerbera, things started to change when we came up with some better whitefly predatory mites, Swirsky being one. And one of the advantages Gerbera has, this is actually out of one of my clients. That's this picture. It's a good promotion for Copert. So those are slow release sachets for predatory mites. But the one advantage Gerbera has, this is unpotted, but we can talk about cut Gerberas as well, is the type of leaf surface it has. It's very smooth. Predatory mites love it. So do whitefly and spudmite, things like that. But it doesn't have to negotiate, hairy leaf surface and things like that. And the leaf is rather big. So we call it refugia. They like to be out of the direct sun and things like that. So they're able to go under the underside of these leaves, and it just happens to be where their food is as well. So, for most cases, Alstomeria is cut flower. It can be potted too, but cut flower here in Ontario has a very minimal growing temperature it needs. It's from the mountains of Peru. It's Peruvian lily, and I got my start here in Ontario in putting. Um, a biocontrol into that, and natural enemies as well come in constantly. And as a result, like we've gone, over 20 years with biocontrol, very little spraying. So it's worked out really well. And again, it's got a good structure for it to happen. Hopefully, I'm not going over time. So, adding banker plants, I just took this picture the other day. So, on your right of the picture are tomato plants, quite large. I get them to prune off the top, but not the bottom. And what we have is biocontrol going on that. On the left, on the floor, there is hibiscus plants. And the hibiscus plants, the ones we get in Canada, are notoriously oversprayed. So they have a lot of pesticide residue coming in. So it's always a challenge to get biocontrol on them. So what we do with those tomatoes is we get those biocontrol going on a non-sprayed crop. We never spray the tomatoes. And tomatoes are a magnet for whiteflies. So we actually have Bemisia whitefly on those, came in with those on those hibiscus. So we get them to fly over and we do the releases. And we're still kind of looking at how well the biocontrol goes over to the crop once it's got a full belly kind of thing. Delphasis seems to have a very good possibility of going back and forth. So we think that's what's happening. That's a black lady beetle, for those who don't know. This is another project we worked on extensively, and this is alfalfa, which isn't what you think of when you think of greenhouses. So this is out of a field. We have a lot of alfalfa fields here in Ontario. So the reason we do that is because we're using a pea aphid on there. There's another one called alfalfa aphid that could work, but we're using pea aphid on there. And the reason for that is because when in the good old days of raising parasitoids in the insect breeders, they would use pea aphid, some of them. So we've kind of gone, what goes around comes around. We've kind of gone back to that. Now we have these alfalfa sitting out, using them for parasitoids. And then they'll go into the crop. The pea aphid, unless you're growing peas or lupin, something from that family, they'll just stay on the alfalfa. We just recently started using clover as well, which is related. Eggplant. So this is on the floor there is poinsettia crop. We've been doing quite a bit of work with bankers. Now, the significance of this is we can't draw the Bemisia whitefly out of the poinsettia crop with eggplant or tomato, not for lack of trying, but we can't do it. So what we do is we put them in ahead of time. We usually have this flight in the summer of greenhouse whitefly that does go to the eggplant quite well. So it'll come in through the vents from surrounding areas, and then we get the wasps going early, even before the poinsettia cuttings show up. So that's usually now it's like late July now that comes in. So we have those going ahead of time, and again, I showed you the having a proper water line and that keeping it's in very good shape. So we have whitefly going. We also have a wild strain of aureus going on these as well. And that came over from an ornamental pepper crop that they had shipped out. It's now shipped out. This one being really creative. This is a hoverfly. It looks like a bee. It mimics the colors of a bee, so it doesn't get eaten. It is a fly, two wings, the Diptera. So it's the adult that you see there is a pollinator, and you'll see that out in your gardens. And but the baby eats aphids, a few other things as well, but we like to see it eat aphids. Now, in ornamentals, it tends to take too long to go through its cycle, and by that time, the aphids have ballooned up. What we do use it for, though, is to help us scout. So when it's flying through the crop, and now has to be just foliage, can't be where there's flowers, because like I said, it is a pollinator, so go to the flowers. So where it's just foliage, we watch, if we do come across them, we watch to see how they're moving. So if they're moving fast and through the plants, there's nothing there. If it stops and lands or it hovers and um, his back parts